let's get started.
Did you see that AT&T pulled their we're standing for net neutrality one day after? He's signaling us.
Oh, they pulled it?
Yeah, he's signaling us.
All right, hey, we're live. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack, and here for a discussion about serverless. And I have Alex and Cassandra here. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Alex?
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm the author and the project lead of. Are we going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Of OpenFaaS, which is serverless functions made simple for Docker and Kubernetes. And Go ahead. I'm sorry, there's people behind us. There's stuff happening behind us, but that's me, and I'm giving a talk tomorrow on serverless, how to go from 0 to serverless in 60 seconds.
Okay.
Also part of the serverless work group with the CNCF. I've been following along and getting to know the different projects, pros and cons, and their general approach to serverless.
Okay. Cassandra?
I'm Cassandra Perch. I am a developer relations engineer at IOPipe. We do AWS Lambda monitoring and visibility. So basically, if you have an AWS Lambda app, we can tell you a lot about how it's running and when things are going wrong.
Interesting. So the monitoring and the visibility. There's so many different aspects to serverless technologies right now that I think we're just starting to understand, right? There's I thought of like the earliest days of serverless is almost like widget making, I can make this, I can make it, all I need to do is just add this little code and it'll like make my computer beep in a different kind of a way, whatever, but now we're starting to catch up a little bit, and it seems like, if you guys could speak to that kind of development, where you see us now in kind of serverless evolution, because it seems now we're starting to talk about are those harder issues like monitoring and how do you, and high availability and issues like that.
Yeah, so I guess there really is a lot of concerns when you start to look at a serverless system, particularly one that isn't provided by a cloud, one maybe you run privately or in a hybrid cloud like OpenFaaS. And that's one thing that we're really leaning on is the CNCF technology and projects and the landscape to pick projects that will work well together. So an example might be Prometheus. So you can start to build up observability of your functions by having Prometheus baked in, so that as your functions are running, you know what the HTTP codes are, you know how long it's taking to run, and you can use those metrics to do clever things like auto-scaling.
Okay, you're right.
Yeah, we're definitely at a crossroads with serverless in terms of tooling. I kind of talked about this at a talk recently. Basically, we're at a point where developers are like, okay, cool, this is neat, I want to use this in production, but here's the checklist of things I have to show the CTO before we can even think about putting this in production. And that's where the tooling is starting to kind of just now catch up. And it's definitely an interesting coalescence of first-party tools, so the tools like, say, Microsoft Azure is rolling out for their functions, and third-party tools like IOPipe, like the tools that you work with OpenFaaS. And I believe that symbiotic relationship between the cloud provider, or the cloud providers rolling out their own tools and the third-party tools kind of encapsulating the edges and really diving deep into the specifics is going to be a very interesting ecosystem for at least the next year, especially with things like with players like the serverless framework that try to create a unified experience for as many platforms as possible.
So what are the different approaches we're starting to see? I mean, I know OpenFaaS is Kubernetes oriented, right?
Yeah.
Why did you choose that as a way to orient, your project?
Yeah, so to start with, I was trying to build out Alexa skills, which if you've ever tried it, you'll know you need you buy the hockey puck disc, you put it at home, you plug it in on your Wi-Fi, and then you find out that you need to enter your credit card billing information, set up an IAM account, and several days later you might have created Hello World for Alexa. And as a Docker captain, I thought, well, is this the best way to do it? And I looked at the developer experience. You wrote code in a web editor. Right. Where's your CI/CD? Where's your vulnerability scanning? If you needed dependencies, you installed them on your client, on your Mac, and then you zipped it up. It just all felt wrong compared to what we'd been seeing with containers. And actually I started with Docker Swarm, and it was probably midway through the project I pivoted to also support Kubernetes, which has turned out to be a very good bet, right? And so having the Docker container as that primitive means that we can basically get buy-in from the whole cloud native community, because it's what they understand, it's what they trust. Okay. You may talk about a system being battle tested, but what about a system that's been built with battle tested technologies, right, put together? You can just take that to production because it's not unlike the existing microservices you're already managing.
And what's your approach at IOPI? What is that approach that you are taking towards the development and engineering behind your serverless technology?
So we actually run our infrastructure on AWS Lambda. So we dog food our own product. We use our own product to monitor our AWS Lambda app. That's mostly due to we're small and we're new, and so we're focusing on one provider right now. But that we are focusing on just AWS Lambda. But we are definitely interested in seeing the serverless community evolve and grow, and we definitely love hearing about new technologies and new players in the space.
So how do you think then about, what do you see as your respected, and this is going to seem like a funny question, but your respected disadvantages in comparison?
So I think Alex kind of hinted at this. You lose a lot of control over your application when you go with a cloud function provider like AWS Lambda, like Microsoft Azure Functions, like Google Cloud Functions. I think that's why Kubernetes-based systems are so interesting, is because you get a little bit of that control back, for better or worse, because there's trade-offs to both. If you don't have to worry about your infrastructure, that can allow your developers to focus more on the code. But if you need to worry about your infrastructure, if you want that control, systems like the ones that OpenFast is building allow you to have that control back, and that's why I find it so interesting. So our approach is more using the cloud providers, but we're also interested in seeing how the non-cloud providers and the ones that give control back to the users will improve and continue to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. We're saying you can have more control and more observability, or you can go down something that's quite a narrow path that will probably work for a lot of people, right?
So
if you look at Google Cloud Functions, they only support, unless this has changed recently, Node.js. That's it on Debian.
Right.
How are you going to launch your Go functions? How are you going to make use of your existing .NET infrastructure? You cannot.
But what about the disadvantages that you face? What are those disadvantages you face in choosing the route you did?
So what would a disadvantage be in either approach?
In your approach.
In my approach. So if you need to compare it with Lambda, I think you can run 3,000 concurrent requests, and that's your maximum. Now, you could run more than that with OpenFast concurrently, right? You could probably go as high as you want, but you're still going to have something there to run it on. And a lot of the people that are coming to us and to the community are actually finding that whatever pros there were from having a piece of code that they threw into a web editor are actually overridden by being able to run the code in environments they've already secured themselves, that their IT teams are happy with. And actually one thing that you can do is reduce your costs by running your code next to your data. So you don't have to pay for fees for it going in and out of your network for a VPC, and you can be much simpler to get to code in production.
Cassandra?
To counter with some recent developments, you keep mentioning a web editor. You can develop AWS Lambda functions on your machine and use either the serverless framework or the AWS CLI to deploy. You don't have to use the web CLI. Also, SAM does run Lambda functions locally. So if you're testing or you want to run a function as many times as possible before you put it into production, you can run it without incurring extra billing by using SAM local. Our CTO, Erica, actually wrote a lovely tutorial on how to do that. So AWS is responding to some of these downsides.
So that isn't actually Lambda. When you run SAM, you're using an open source project called LambCI that just runs something that feels like a Lambda container, but it isn't. And so when you have OpenFAS, what you run on your laptop and in staging is the exact same Docker image in every environment, which is why we bought into this cloud native community. That's what Docker was about, right? Packaging and getting exactly the same, and the runtime is the same too. There are things that they're doing, and I think that's really going to help them. But yeah, I think we probably kind of covered that now.
You were going to say something, I think. Right? Okay. So then, in terms of the direction of the overall kind of the serverless community, there's going to be issues that are going to need some unity around. So there's a unified experience that everyone will have. So what are some of those things? What is it, for instance, in the monitoring space, like, and what are going to be some of those those projects that are going to be important to seeing the overall development of the overall community?
I don't think there's any clear winner in terms of monitoring and observability across all platforms. That is still such an underdeveloped ecosystem.
And monitoring, and that's true. I think monitoring.
Oh yes, that's true. Monitoring in general, but especially in the serverless space, you do have a lot of vendor lock-in when you pick where you're running your serverless functions. You are also inherently picking how you're going to monitor your serverless functions. I think that's going to get better with time, especially with the serverless framework taking the approach that they're trying to take of multi-cloud. But I also question the applicability of multi-cloud. So, but that's a whole nother argument. But either way, right now, yes, there's a lot of vendor lock-in with you pick one, you pick a platform, and you end up with the tools for that platform. And you don't have a lot of choice. But I think that's going to change very much in the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, specifically on logging, if we go back to AWS again, you have something like CloudWatch, and you'll be able to see how things are going. I don't see a future where an open source project like OpenWhisk, OpenFAS, or Kubeless would have logging that was the same as a cloud provider. It just doesn't make sense. But what we may see is some convergence among the open source projects as to how they will do their logging and their observability. We're seeing things like Zipkin being integrated, Istio, and open tracing. And I think that there may be equivalents for the cloud, but I think where you'll see convergence is between those projects. And in the serverless work group at the moment, a number of projects are working towards, is there an event format? Because sometimes you aren't triggering your functions through an API gateway over HTTP. Is there an event format that everybody can use? Like, it's called open events. Now, if you had a body that worked everywhere, then that's going to start to standardize things. And the work group's currently, I think they're meeting tonight to talk about it. An example, you've got Event Grid. You have one format for that. SNS from AWS is another format. OpenWhisk has its own format. And then the Serverless Inc. project has another format again.
Cassandra?
Yeah, that's actually kind of what I was alluding to when I said that I think the tooling is going to see a huge overhaul in the next year. Is the project that's actively taking place to kind of standardize the event object and standardize what an event looks like and what fields are there. I think if they are successful, that, like you said, that will definitely help open source tools say, okay, yes, we can support all these platforms now because we know what an event looks like from all of these platforms, and we don't have to maintain 4 different ideas of what is an event, or more than 4, far more than 4. It'll be nice. It's a controversial project. I've had some serverless developers be very happy about it, some not so happy, but I would like to see some standardization of an event, or at least something that we can polyfill to. So even if the big vendors won't agree to it, I'm sure someone will write an AWS plugin to convert their event system to whatever open system is created.
I can see how that would be a bit contentious. You're talking about definitions. You're talking about, which really kind of come down to people's own opinions about what those definitions are. That kind of reflects on their own backgrounds and their own histories. And so that makes a lot of sense that it's kind of at that point right now. So this is happening in which group then? The defining the event?
CNCF Serverless Work Group is spending some time working around that. And from what I've seen, there are 2 competing standards that are being proposed by 2 groups. and as per every committee, you always get this kind of thing. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. Look at the serverless workgroup white paper. We were, I think, 11 months in, and one of the lead people, I won't say their name, said this thing on the call: "What's the point of this document? What are we trying to get to?"
Yeah.
And that was like 11 months in when we were trying to wrap it up.
Right.
And so I think there's definitely a lot of pros to an open governance and committees, but also sometimes you lose some of the kernel of what you're actually trying to get to.
Right. You lose sight of it.
Yeah.
So
Scope creep.
What?
Scope creep.
Yeah, because you can talk a lot about all kinds of different things. So are you guys trying to? So how are you trying to do that? Because this is really interesting to me, like at how communities develop, right? And how the colleagues in certain field or find their way. I mean, have you started to establish some pillars, some values, some mission or?
So within the Open FAS project, when the amount of contributors started to balloon, and we're now around 65, started to think about, well, how can we kind of get everybody feeling like they're contributing to something bigger, like they're all important and their contributions matter. And so I started to set up twice a month a contributors call on a Sunday night at the time slot that kind of worked for everybody. And when I kicked that off, I thought, well, we really need to write down some of the visions so that people understand the direction for Open FAS, they have the compass. And the main one was developer first. Right, to make something that was unsurprising, that would be easy for a developer to get up and running with, but they could also customize by having an open platform, so it's unsurprising. The second core value is operational simplicity, which may in fact end up working against us because it's so easy to get up and running. You can have it there in 60 seconds. Now, maybe people will just be able to run that without actually ever needing professional services. So we might be stabbing ourselves in our own foot, but it is so easy to get up and running. It uses Unix principles, so every time you run a function, we're using standard in and out pipes. We're using things that people already know and comfortable with. And then the other key sort of value is to be community-centric. And you'll see with the amount of contributors we have, the stars on GitHub, and the kind of conversations and pull requests we're getting, there's a high level of activity, and the developer love is there. For instance, one of the contributors that lives in Austin came to me and he said, I'm working on a POC in my own time, and I'm going to show an architect. And that's just what happened with me with Docker at ADP. It was like, I'm working on a POC with Docker because I love this technology so much, and then I'm going to convince my boss that this is what we need to do, and that's what's happened. And so he's now got his architects really excited, and they have all these functions that are basically microservices, and they want to convert them and make them easier to run.
Cassandra, I mean, it's a little bit different for you, isn't it? I mean, you're not exactly involved in the open source, projects that, that Alex speaks of, but you have to think about your own kind of values and your own culture. What's driving your own, how's that driving your own development?
So, what's going on in the serverless community is absolutely something that we have to keep an eye on, because as a visibility and monitoring product, if we're not monitoring and proving visible to things that users want, then we're not going to do very well. So we're keeping an eye on things like the event standardization, especially because that would benefit us as a monitoring platform. We're keeping an eye on vendors and what they're up to. But as for the core tenets of what the company is for, we actually do share a user first as well. That's part of why we built the dashboard the way we did. With AWS, the UI can be tricky at times, just a smidge, and so our view was, instead of having to wade through CloudWatch logs and deal with the AWS interface, we wanted to build a product where users can get their information quickly and succinctly. And so I think that's one of the things I love about the serverless community is there is a lot of focus on developer first from the open source side of things. From the vendor side of things, it's hit and miss. Microsoft's been doing a lot about developer experience that I've been really happy to see, but from the open source side of things, developer first seems to be an extremely core tenet, and as a developer relations engineer and as a person, as a coder, that really appeals to me.
That's a great note to end on. I think that's that strikes me as a real win for the overall community to have that focus from the start, both from your perspective in an AWS Lambda monitoring tool and OpenFast as a Kubernetes based platform. Thank you both for spending some time with me and talking about the serverless ecosystem. I've learned a lot. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.